I'm Katie Green.
I am Dan Green, and welcome back to the Greening Out podcast. Now today we are talking about secession and the Scottish independence referendum, and returning to the show to chat about this with us is Dr. Walter Block. Walter is an Austrian economist, libertarian theorist. He's an author and editor of many books. He's a Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar, Endowed Chair and Professor of Economics at Loyola University, and a Senior Fellow with the Ludwig von Mises Institute. Walter, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Walter, last week it was the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum. It was on the 18th of September. Were you watching or hearing any of the coverage of it?
Yes, I was rooting for the yes side, but we lost. So I don't know. I guess we have to try again, or if you fail, try and try again is the motto. I was very disappointed. I thought that they would win, even though the yes side was mainly socialist. So, it's a strange bedfellow situation. Here I'm rooting for the socialists to win. But the people in England aren't that free enterprise anyway. So it's sort of this kind of socialist versus that kind of socialist. It seems to me, though, that secession is not really a socialist ideal. If anything, the socialists want everyone to be together in a gigantic collective, what have you, and you think they'd favor world government. And not only should the socialists in Scotland not want to separate from England, but they should want to join everyone. We should have the UN be the world government, or the US be the world government, somebody be the world government. You'd think that's what they want, but happily they wanted secession, which was great. Yeah. But it didn't work.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. And like you were saying, maybe try again. There's been a total change in perceptions in Scotland that I've definitely noticed. I mean, I have never seen people get this enthused about anything politically in my life in Scotland, because people are mostly apathetic to all this kind of thing. And even now, there's a group being started called the 45%. And it is the people who voted yes, and they're not giving up, but they're actually, what's interesting is not only are they agitating for another referendum, but also they're doing sort of charitable works, like setting up food banks for the poor and things like that. So they're actually doing a bit of social outreach and things like that. So it's actually quite an interesting mood here just now.
Well, that's really wonderful that they're not giving up. And even the loss has got benefits, because it'll enliven the Quebec people who might want to secede, or the Catalonians or the Basques. Now, my understanding is that the Spanish government will not allow a referendum for the Catalonians or the Basques. But the Catalonians and the Basques can say, look, is Spain worse than England? I mean, in England, they at least allowed a vote, and now you're not even allowing a vote. So even the Scottish attempt, even though it failed, it is got some positives. So we can, we 45%ers, we can take heart from our failure, because our failure helped elsewhere. Maybe Hong Kong can secede from China, or Singapore secede from wherever they are. I'm not sure.
But yeah, no, I totally agree. And for example, on the night of the referendum, a lot of people were in touch with me, particularly friends of the show and listeners to our show, and a lot of them were from the US, particularly people who were talking about New Hampshire and Texas, which was really quite interesting, and they were really rooting for us in a big way, and I thought that was fascinating. And then not only that, there was a lot of people from independence movements from all over the world, not just Catalonia in America, but other places, who'd all come to Edinburgh on that day to have a big conference together. So it sort of seems to me like this has sort of woke something up, and I think that the elites who seem to want to globalise and centralise everything are starting to get a little worried by this.
Slightly worried. Who was it? Gandhi said first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they get worried about you. And they're now worried about us, so we're in the third stage, and then we're supposed to win. I don't know about that, but at least we're getting in the third stage. You mentioned Texas and New Hampshire, and there's also Vermont next to New Hampshire that's trying to secede, or at least there are some forces of secession. Now, in the U.S., secession had a bad press, or a bad aura, because the South wanted to secede, and the view was that they only wanted to secede to support slavery. This is nonsense. First of all, they don't have slavery in Scotland, as far as I know.
No.
No.
So slavery can't have anything to do with secession in Scotland. Slavery can't have anything to do with secession in Catalonia or the Basque area. Slavery can't have anything to do with Quebec in Canada. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. The first movement for secession in the United States, I think, was in Massachusetts in 1825, somewhere in there. And it was on slavery, but the Massachusetts people wanted to secede from the U.S. because they were against slavery, and they said that the U.S. government in 1825 was supporting slavery. So you can hardly say that if you're a secessionist, you're pro-slavery. Here, the people in Massachusetts were wanting to secede on the very grounds that they were against slavery. Mm-hmm. And in any case, when the South seceded or tried to secede in 1861, there was slavery in the North too. As Tom, my friend Tom DiLorenzo points out over and over again, Lincoln was saying things like, "Look, I don't care. I'm putting Lincoln's words in my own words, but this was the gist of what Tom cites Lincoln as saying." Mm-hmm. And what Lincoln is saying is, "I don't really care about slavery. If getting rid of slavery will keep the Union together, I'll get rid of slavery."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keeping slavery will keep the Union together. I'll keep slavery. Namely, I don't care about slavery. Mm-hmm. I care about keeping the Union because I'm a centralist or whatever. So I'm putting words in Lincoln's mouth. He didn't say it exactly in my Brooklyn argot. But that was the gist of what he was saying. So the whole idea that secession is somehow pro-slavery is just preposterous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a nonsense. And what's funny is, like, for example, they maybe say, like you said, in the US, when people hear secession, they sort of think about the Civil War. But surely the American Revolution was based on secession from Britain, but somehow they don't use that word there.
Yes, that's right. The Revolutionary War was a war of secession from England. We in the United States were a colony of Britain, and we wanted to secede, and somehow that's okay. But when the South wanted to secede, that's not okay. And in 1789, there was slavery in the U.S., so the whole thing is crazy. But let me give you a slight correction. There was no civil war in 1861 in the U.S. Mm-hmm. A civil war is when there were two parties, each one wants to control the whole thing, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. Like in the Spanish Civil War of 1936, the commies and the fascists each wanted to run all of Spain.
Yeah.
So that was a true civil war. And in the Russian Civil War of 1917, the White Army and the Red Army each wanted to run the whole place. Yeah. So that was a civil war. But in 1861, it wasn't a civil war. The North wanted to run the whole place, but the South just wanted to secede. So a much more accurate way to characterize that war was the war between the states, or the war of northern aggression, or the war to prevent southern secession, or the war of secession, or something like that. But it was not a civil war.
Yeah, it's actually, we'll go off on a slight tangent here, but I think why not? I think because I've actually been digging quite a bit into the American Civil War lately, and it's funny how there's a lot of misconceptions. Like, when I first heard that there was black slave owners, I was like, my God, I've never heard that before, and then I found out it was true, and I was like, why is that not mentioned more often? Like, and I've also heard, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard a few people say that the term redneck comes from, like, Scottish and Irish slaves who were, when they were working in that intense southern heat, and because of the sunburn they got and their very light skin, they developed the term redneck, and that's where that comes from. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not sure about that second one. I am sure of the first one. There were some blacks who owned slaves.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So if you wanted to have reparations, you couldn't have reparations for slavery, which I favor. Mm-hmm. You couldn't have reparations from all whites to all blacks, because some of the blacks were slave owners.
Yeah.
And if there was any reparations, we should take away what the black slave owners gave to their grandchildren and give it to the black grandchildren of the slaves. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right about that. Now, I don't know where redneck came from. I don't think that there were Scottish or Irish slaves.
I know there was a lot of Irish slavery at a lot of points. I know that to be true. I'm not too sure about the US, but I know that the Irish were taken to a lot of places and used as slaves over history.
Wasn't it indentured servants? I don't think it was. I'm not sure. I'm not a historian. I don't know. My understanding is that it was indentured servitude, which is different than slavery. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the Irish were slaves, but as I say, I'm an economist and a
Yeah.
theorist. I don't really know for sure. I might be wrong on that, but my understanding is that they were indentured servants, which is a lot different than slavery, because indentured servitude, the people had agreed to be indentured servants for 7 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is very different than slavery, where it was for life, unless you were manumitted. And also it was against their will. It was by compulsion, which is, a violation of the very basic element, the basic essence of libertarianism.
Oh, yeah. See if we had a wee digression there, but it was fun. But if we're getting back on track, what do you think it would take for example, a state, let's just take Texas or something, what do you think that would take for that state to secede? Because we spoke to Keith Preston before from Attack the System, and in his mind he said it would probably take an entire economic meltdown in the US, as in like Soviet Union style, for a state to secede. But do you think it would have to be that extreme?
I think it would have to be more extreme than that.
Really? Really?
I don't think an economic meltdown, say like in the 30s, 32, 33, 36, whatever, 1930s, would succeed. I mean, there is some attempt at secession, like some Northern California counties want to secede and make themselves into the new state of Northern California or something like that.
Yeah,
and they're, that's sort of within the system.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's a threat. I don't think that anyone's going to say they're extremists and they want to bomb us, or they're fascists, or whatever the latest bad thing is. So I think that if the Northern California, or if California broke into 3 states, or the Northern California seceded from the rest of California, I don't think that the venom would come out. They might not win, but in any case, it wouldn't be that significant from a libertarian point of view if we had a 51st state, and the 51st state was Northern California. Now you had Northern and Southern California, like Northern and Southern Dakota, or Northern and Southern Carolina, North and South Carolina. No real big deal. But I think if Texas or New Hampshire or Vermont, to pick the 3 states that most likely to secede, were to secede, they'd have to become, I don't know what, libertarians or maybe socialists to
maybe takes all sorts. Yeah.
To follow the Scottish case, but there'd have to be a real big change in the hearts and minds of the people, and I don't think that an economic meltdown would do it. I think that they'd have to have something special, and I don't know what it is that the Scottish have. Well, what the Scottish have is their ethnicity is a little different. What the what do you call it? The Quebecois, the people in Quebec have, is that they're French, and the rest of the place stems from England. So they don't have to have any ideological differences. We're French socialists, you're English socialists. We don't have anything to do with you. The Scottish people say, well, we're Scottish socialists. We don't like you English socialists. We want to have a separation. But that wouldn't really apply for Vermont, New Hampshire, or Texas, because the people are the same ethnicity, give or take. I mean, there might be some different portions of the people in the 3 states, but by and large, they all have roughly the same population as the rest of the U.S., so they wouldn't want to secede on that basis, and the only basis that they would want to secede on would be ideological, and I mean, that's a tough road to hoe, because it's very hard to convert people to libertarianism. I mean, Ron Paul did magnificently, but what kind of vote did he get? 3, 5, 10%, or whatever. So
it's okay, wait, it might pick up back up. Are you still there, Walter?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sorry, you froze a bit just after you mentioned Ron Paul there, but you just froze a little bit.
Oh, well, the gods, when you mention the name of Ron Paul, everything
goes wrong.
I think I should just leave that in, because that was fun.
I might just leave it in. We might just not even edit that out.
But, oh, no, don't edit that out. That's important.
That'd be fun.
But yeah, I've read about the California thing, and it seems like they just want to sort of break it up into smaller regions, but within still like the US government, so it's still part of the same sort of power structure. And I was thinking this as well, because I was sort of wondering, like, if they did say they got like a massive amount of people in Texas who all said we want to secede, and they were agitating and stuff like that, I still can't see how the US federal government would just go, well, fine,
okay,
let's just if you want to secede. I just can't see that happening in any way.
Well, it didn't happen with England and Scotland. All three parties in England united on one thing, apart from taxing everybody and
Yeah.
stuff that they agree on. Supposedly, that they don't agree on anything, but they agree on a lot of things. And now they certainly agreed that Scotland should not leave. And I'm sure that Washington D.C., the Beltway, Obama, or whoever is the president, unless it's Rand Paul, I'm not sure about Rand Paul. If he becomes president in 2016 and Texas wants to secede, you might get a very different answer from him. But let's take a traditional politician, non-Ron Paul and non-Rand Paul.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's say Hillary Clinton gets in, or some horrible, or some equally horrible Republican becomes president. How would they look upon Texas or Vermont or New Hampshire seceding? They would be very, very much against it. And I think they might go the Spanish route and say you can't even have a plebiscite on this, although I'm not sure about that. Maybe they would have a plebiscite or allow a plebiscite. Maybe if the Texans voted, 55-45 to secede, maybe they would allow it. I don't know. It's hard to predict how they would react. I think they would bitterly oppose it, and I'm not sure just how bitterly. Maybe go the Spanish route and not allow any vote at all, and maybe go to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court would say you can't vote on these things. But my understanding of the initial, Texas wasn't one of the original 13 colonies. 13 states that became the United States in 1789, I guess it was. But the other states, the non-13, came in under the same rules as those 13. And my understanding of the Articles of Confederation was this was the United States with an S at the end.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the United States government. It was the 13 United States. We're plural. Separate states and plural, and we're just uniting. But we can secede anytime we want, which is what the South thought was true in 1861. But in 2015 or 2014, if Texas or New Hampshire or Vermont decided to secede for whatever reason, I think it would be great, because my ideal as an anarchist is there are, say, 7 billion people. Well, we should have 7 billion states. Everyone should be a sovereign, We should have the Katie state, the Dan state, the Walter state.
Of course.
And we could have good relations, no tariffs between us. We could trade, and, everyone would be sovereign, and that would be ideal. But getting back, say, closer to reality, which would be better, having, say, 1,000 countries? I think now we have about 200. Which would be better, having 1,000 countries or 3? And I picked 3 because in 1984 there were 3 countries: Oceania, I forget the other countries. And obviously we'd be better off with 1,000 states, each the size of Switzerland or Monaco, or city-states that they used to have in Germany and Italy. And maybe Edinburgh could be its own sovereign state. And if we had 1,000 states, then, or maybe 5,000 different countries, then any large city could be its own country. And this wouldn't really be a challenge it'd be sort of like Northern California seceding from California. In the eyes of most people, if you go from the present, say, 200 governments to, say, 3,000 governments, the world would still be sort of like it is, only you'd have many, many smaller countries instead of bigger countries. And it seems like they're amalgamating. I mean, if the EU becomes one country, China is a country, and India is a country, and let's say South America is a country, and North America is a country. Well, now you're getting toward the 1984 horror of the 3 countries with war with each other. And I mean, and look, suppose we only had one country, the world government. The problem is, if the bad guys get in charge of that, where do you go? You can't go to Mars, not yet, maybe one day. Although they claim Mars too, this is part of
They would.
They would, or the moon or something. I mean, suppose Hitler gets in charge of the world government, or suppose John McCain gets in charge of the world government. He starts nuking people or something. The whole benefit of having alternatives is, if you don't like it in one place, you can vote with your feet. You can go somewhere else. Whereas if they preclude that and have just the one world government, that would be horrible. So I would say, instead of going toward fewer states, instead of countries amalgamating, nations amalgamating, let's have some breakups. I would have loved to have had Scotland break up, and I was horrified that there were some people calling themselves libertarians in England who came out against it. I think the guy named Sean Gabb, Gabb.
Yeah, we've had him on the show twice. Yeah. We've had him a couple of times on.
I was shocked because I thought he was a libertarian, and he's a member of Hans Hoppe's Peace and Prosperity Society. I forget what it's called, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he's happy that Scotland's yes vote lost.
I think it's mostly he is from England, and I think there was
see, Sean has a really interesting perspective on libertarianism because he favours sort of what we would call statelessness. However, Sean makes the case for the old order in England, as in the monarchy and the landed aristocracy. He still thinks that's a good thing. So Sean's got a very, very interesting take on libertarianism, a very unique take,
and
actually.
of course, I mean, we don't always 100% agree with everything anybody on our show says, but it's interesting. I'm very interested in how other people view libertarianism. It's interesting people's versions of it. You know what I mean? And it's not necessarily mine.
Yeah, but he has a very, very unique take.
Yeah.
Well, Hans Hoppe wrote a book. I forget the exact title. Something, The God That Failed, the Government, or Democracy.
Democracy, the God That Failed. Yeah.
And he comes out in favor of monarchy, and I don't see anything wrong with monarchy. I'm a fan of Hans Hoppe on this and on many, many other things. But what's wrong with the monarchy seceding from another monarchy? In other words, if you go back to English monarchy and now you have Scottish monarchy and they're separate, well, what the heck? Great. But Sean is saying that Scotland shouldn't secede, and I find it very difficult to reconcile that with libertarianism.
Mm-hmm.
I understand.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he does have a really interesting view, but the way he sort of said now is what he was saying to us. We spoke to him only, what was it, last week or something?
Yeah, it was like the day after.
For the second interview, and what he was saying is he wrote an article about how this is a kind of win for England, because for a long time there's been a sort of thing called the West Lothian question, and I'll make it quite simple. We have the Scottish Parliament, and there's Scottish MPs in the English Parliament in Westminster. Now, a lot of Scottish MPs get to vote on, for example, issues that are England only, that they're dealt with in the Scottish Parliament. So that is unfair to the English people. So now, since this, what David Cameron's come out with what he calls his devolution revolution. He's talking about giving more powers to England, more powers to Scotland, more powers to Wales, and all this kind of thing. Like, it'll be sort of more federal. Well, that is a good thing in the short term. I still kind of think that it's not really what we're looking for, to be honest, because we're still under this big Westminster umbrella.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my problem with it. I think it's sort of just it was basically they got worried when the yes went ahead in the polls. They got terrified, and then they started scrambling as quickly as they could to try and give us anything. The bribes came out left, right, and centre. And unfortunately, some Scottish people bought that and voted no, but we didn't buy it at all.
No.
No, I would agree with you. I was thinking of applying this to the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's only one country there. There's Israel.
Yeah.
And people are saying, well, we should have two nations, namely an Arab or Palestine and Israel, to use those two terms. But maybe we should have 3 or 4 countries there, because the people in Gaza hate the people in the rest of Palestine, or the rest of the whatever the other area is. I mean, they had a big fight. So why should the Gazans have the same country as the other people? I mean, that was the whole problem with the British and the French when they left the Middle East. They divided the countries so that the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds were all in one country, and then there were more Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds in another country. What they should have done, if they were going to be better central planners, is they should have said, okay, here's the Sunni country, here's the Shiite country, here's the Kurdistan, or the Kurd country, or Kurdistan, I guess you'd call it. And then there might be less fighting, because it seems that a lot of the warfare is between, not within the Sunnis or within the Shiites or within the Kurds, but rather these 3 groups are at each other's throats. And I think we want less being at other people's throats, or to minimize that as much as possible, because people die in that way. And but the way they divided it up was just horrible. And now the U.S. is taking the view, well, Iraq is a sovereign country. Iraq borders are sacred, and nobody should ever secede from Iraq, and have a separate Kurdistan and a separate this and a separate that. And now the ISIS wants to, change the
Oh God, yeah.
borders a little bit
Oh
slightly.
gosh, yes.
And it seems to me that a way toward peace would be to have secession.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the Scots and the Irish and the Walesians, or the Welsh, I guess you'd call it.
Welsh, yeah.
Yes.
Welsh are not at each other's throats, so it's not like the Middle East. But in the Middle East, they're at each other's throats. They're killing each other.
Yeah.
And secession seems to be a moderate solution. I mean, the libertarian solution would be no government, but take a more moderate position would be let them get into different nations such that the population is homogeneous within each country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I see what you mean, and it's funny because Lou Rockwell had shared something on Facebook. It was like a week or so ago. It's funny because last time we were talking about individual secession and just how you bring up the Middle East, and it was a kind of joke story from The Onion, and it was like the headline was everyone in Middle East given own country and 317 million state solution, which I thought was quite funny. But it does make sense. But see what I wanted to sort of talk to you a bit about, because now we were talking about there the EU and things. I've heard a lot of talk and seen like a couple of videos and things like that about this kind of North American Union idea. Like sort of bringing Canada, the US, and Mexico all together under one North American Union. Do you think that would have any traction at all? Do you think people would sleepwalk into that the way we did into the EU?
Well, let me talk about the EU first. I have no objection to common currencies like the euro,
Mm-hmm.
but my favorite common currency is not the euro or the dollar, it's gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People were free to choose. Now, Milton Friedman had a TV series, Free to Choose. When people were free to choose, they always chose gold or silver, and yet Friedman was a bitter opponent of gold as money. So I have no objection. Indeed, I strongly, enthusiastically support a common currency, gold. So in a sense, having the lira and the mark and the pound and all these different European currencies, I think euro is better. It's a move toward amalgamation of currencies, but that doesn't mean you have to have political union, because when we had the gold standard, we had many different countries, and nobody said, well, everyone who uses gold has to be in one country. That would have meant everyone was in one country. Well, apart from the silver issue. So I favor amalgamation or collectivism in currency. Let's all have one currency. It'd be a lot easier to deal with each other if we were all on the gold standard, and that would be it. Now, with regard to the North American Union, I spent some time in Canada. I worked for the Fraser Institute for about 12 years, so I probably know Canada better than most Americans know Canada. I mean, most
Canadian.
I am.
Most Americans don't know Canada at all. Which is on Seattle. I would ask Americans, do you know anyone in Canada I can be friends with? And they say, oh, sure. And they give me addresses in Toronto, which is near New York State, mainly 2,500 miles away. The point is that the Canadians know a lot about American life, but the Americans know virtually nothing about Canadian life. Mm-hmm. And all the intellectual class in Canada, guess which country they hate the most?
America?
It's not North Korea. It's not Russia. It's America. They just seethe with indignation that the U.S. is going to overtake them because, in 1812, the U.S. did try to conquer Canada, but happily the Canadians kicked the U.S. butt. The U.S. has lost a lot of wars, Happily, I'm a fan of U.S. losing wars, especially when they're non-defensive wars, or only when they're non-defensive wars, like Vietnam. The hell are we doing in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Vietnam's weren't going to attack us. What are we doing in Afghanistan or in Iraq? And I shouldn't say we. What are they doing?
Yeah.
What is the American government doing in all these places? What were they doing trying to take over Canada? In any case, Canada hates, or at least the intellectual, which means left classes. I'm not sure why that is, but that's the way it is. They hate America. They hate the U.S., so they wouldn't want to meld with them. Whereas the Americans, they sort of think of Canadians as sort of ordinary, boring white people. That's the joke about Canadians.
Oh, yeah.
From the U.S. side. They're just like just like us, only they're a little less interesting. They're more boring. So I don't think that the Americans would really put up a big fuss if Canada wanted to amalgamate. They'd say, sure, you could be our 51st state. And the Canadians would say, oh, no, we're going to be 10 different states because we have 10 different provinces. So there might be a big battle as to how many states would come in. Would it be 1 or 10? But I don't think the Americans would object much. But I think the Americans would greatly object to Mexico. I mean, Mexicans, they're different. They're browner, whatever. So my sense of the American average white person in America might say, well, if we had to amalgamate with either one of them, we'd pick Canada way over Mexico, but we don't really want to amalgamate with them, although we wouldn't mind that much. But so I think that from the Canadian point of view, they wouldn't want to amalgamate with any of the other two. And from the U.S. point, they wouldn't mind amalgamating with Canada. They wouldn't want to amalgamate with Mexico. So I don't think that that's an option. I'm hoping that we don't have more gigantic countries. I'd rather have smaller ones. Break up Canada into 10 bits, break up the U.S. into 50 bits. Each state should be a country. And I think that would be a much better way to go, be much more consistent with libertarianism than the other way around.
Well, you were talking there about the idea of secession, moving away, smaller countries, and I just want to say on Thursday the 18th there was really a feeling in the air, and I don't mean to say that in a cheesy, corny way. I'm literally saying I walked outside that morning and people were just ecstatic because for once in Scotland we were feeling like, okay, this is time for actual change. Like, this is time to step out the box, try something different. And we didn't agree, Dan and I, with all the economic policies. There were holes in the plan, we thought, but that was our opinion. But there was no way I could look back on it and say I didn't make the right choice. I would have been very disappointed in myself had I voted against it.
And the thing is as well that the narrative has completely changed forever now in the UK, because whereas at one time the Labour Party were very, very popular in Scotland, especially in Glasgow, but the 2011 Scottish parliamentary elections, the Scottish National Party beat them, and now Labour backed no as big as they could, and now all the places that declared in Glasgow all declared for yes. So they have lost all that power because they were once this socialist working people's party, away a long time ago, but nobody believes that anymore, especially not after Tony Blair. So now people, in the Iraq War and everything, so now something has definitely shifted. People aren't buying their nonsense anymore. People have started calling them imperialist and things like that, words that were never used.
Say that word again, imperialist?
Imperialist.
Imperialist.
Yeah, they've started describing the Labour Party as imperialist, which you never used to hear before, but that's common now. So something has definitely changed in Scotland.
And the SNP, the Scottish National Party, did they double?
Oh yeah, they have just about doubled in size. They've become the third largest party in the UK now.
They beat out the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, their membership went up 70% in a few days, afterwards. So something has changed.
And not only that, but my understanding is that 85% of the eligible voters voted.
Yes, massive turnout, yeah.
85% is, gigantic. Usually, and I understand in Australia they have this, you have to vote or compulsory vote.
Yes.
That's a law, yeah.
Because they had so few people voting, 20
That's
or 30%.
awful.
Yeah, horrible.
I really hate that, yeah.
Oh yeah, but 85% of the people voting, and this is really wonderful. This is an opportunity for the Scottish libertarians. I'm more given that I spent so much time in Canada, I'm more familiar with the Canadian situation. But there are libertarians in Quebec. Yeah, and libertarians in Quebec, unlike Sean Gabb, who I think is on this issue, are very, very much in favor of Quebec independence. And a lot of them are French, so they can make waves, or they can have more of a megaphone because they're supporting the Quebecois. So I think you guys, the libertarians of Scotland, if you get it out that you support the the secession, even though you're not socialists, but still you support that, you could get credibility with these socialists that you weren't otherwise able to get.
Yeah.
And then you could make the case that yes, Scotland should be free, but if we have this gigantic welfare state and we have minimum wages and unions and unemployment, we're going to go broke without the English supporting us. So we have to gain more freedom, more economic freedom. So you would have more credibility than otherwise because you agree with them on perhaps the most important concern of theirs.
The actual secession.
And you could say, well, yes, we're enthusiastic. We don't just support secession, we enthusiastically support secession, but we think that the best way for Scotland is to have more free enterprise. Haven't you guys ever heard of David Hume? Haven't you guys ever heard of Adam Smith? Haven't you guys ever heard of all these classical liberals who wrote in the 17th and 18th centuries who promoted free enterprise? Have we forgot them? Whereas in France, what they would then talk about would be Bastiat, who was a French classical liberal.
Oh yeah, I'm a fan of his. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Bastiat was
I loved the law. The law was amazing.
Magnificent. So happily, in each country, we have people that we could refer to that have just as much French blood as any other Frenchman, Bastiat, or just as much Scottish blood as any other Scott, Smith or David Hume. And then you could maybe succeed to a greater degree than otherwise because of this overlap in secession.
Oh yeah. I could not agree more. And right, Walter, we don't want to take up too much of your time, but thank you so much. Every time we speak to you, it's brilliant, and we love it.
Well, you're very kind to have me, and it's always a joy. So anytime, I'm your boy. Get me. So I really like talking to you people. I like talking to kindred spirits, and we're very much kindred spirits.
Thank you so much, Walter.
Absolutely.
So for more libertarian podcasts, writings and news, visit greengatepodcast.co.uk.
And people can find you at walterblock.com, I believe.
Yes.
Absolutely. Walter, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll definitely speak again.
My pleasure. Thank you.